And there was silence in heaven. And then God spoke, saying, would you like 2 lanes or 4 lanes on that bridge? Imagine that you're a figure skating pair. And you've qualified for the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, Utah. And when you get to the Olympics, you skate your hearts out. You skate your absolute best performance that you have ever skated in your life. It is a flawless performance. It is surely a gold medal performance because the crowd just goes nuts when you skated. You did everything perfectly. You made all of your marks. You didn't even trip, fall, or stumble a bit. It was flawless. It was seamless. It was to perfection. Certainly, you will get the gold medal, if not for a backroom deal that was done between the French judge and the Russian judge, so that the Russian figure skating pair, even though they fell twice, they still got higher marks than you did, and they were awarded the gold medal instead of you. And it wasn't until afterwards, when an investigation ensued, that you two were eventually awarded your gold medal. But it wasn't in front of everybody. And you weren't standing on the platform, and you didn't see your flag raised to the sky while the national anthem played. No, you got your gold medal in a back room because of a backdoor deal that was done between 2 other judges from 2 other countries, even though you skated the best by far, obviously, to everyone that was there. Because life isn't fair. Or imagine that you're a homeowner, you're a hard worker, you're careful with your money, you're wise with the loans that you take out. You don't take out more loans than you can afford. You pay off your credit cards every month. But the economy tanks when the housing bubble burst because the banks kept underwriting subprime loans to people who couldn't afford the mortgages once the mortgage rates went back up to where they were supposed to be. And that caused massive foreclosures on the economy that set the economy into a recession that eventually affected you losing your job in 2008 or 2009 because of several past presidents who wanted everyone to live in their own home, even if they couldn't afford them. The sad, tragic irony is you could afford your home, but you're not so sure if you can afford it now because you've lost your job because of other people's decisions and mistakes. Life just isn't fair. Imagine you're a woman, a good, godly gal who always took care of herself her whole life, never smoked, never drank. You watched what you ate, you watched your diet, you even watched how much sun you got during the summertime. You were fair-skinned, and so you were careful not to stay out in the sun too long and not to get sunburned and things like that. You always lived a happy, healthy, holy life. Everything was good until one day you're in your mid-40s. You discover a lump on the side of one of your breasts. So you go to the doctor and you get it checked out. It's diagnosed as cancer. And while you're having your examination, the doctor says it's probably going to spread to your other breast. Within 2 weeks, you have a double mastectomy. Life isn't fair. Or imagine you're a husband with young children at home. And one Saturday morning, your wife is shot and killed when she goes to a mall just to go shopping on an average Saturday. She gets caught in the gunfire and she gets shot and killed, and now you're a young dad, a young husband with 2 young children at home who now have to explain to their children what happened to mom, and you have to develop a new normal in life. You've done nothing wrong. Life isn't fair. If you're wondering about these stories, they're all true. They've all happened. The last one, the mall shooting, happened yesterday. at a mall in Columbia, Maryland. Life isn't fair. If you can understand or relate to any of these stories, you can relate to Job. Because Job's was a life that wasn't fair. Job was a good, godly man, husband and father, who suffered through a lot of things that a lot of us suffer through in our lives today. Job is the perfect example of how to learn to live through life in the moments and times when life is not fair. So Job was the John Wayne of his day. Job is the guy who sat tall in the saddle. He did right by God and he did right by people around him. He was a good, godly man, husband and father. He was the wealthiest man in the land. He had 10 children, 11,500 head of cattle, and numerous workers. Job was the John Wayne of his day, but don't make him out to be a superhero. Don't make him out to be anything other than an average, ordinary human being like you and I. Because if he is anything more than that, in any of our eyes, we will not learn what we need to learn from Job when life isn't fair. He must be and is and must remain just an average, ordinary human being. A good guy who did things the right way, who loved God and who hated evil, who loved his children so much he prayed for them on a regular basis. He provided for them and provided for his workers. And because of his life, God had blessed him richly. But don't allow Job to not be affected the way you and I would be affected by the tragedies that are about to happen in his life. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him in all the land. He is blameless and upright. He is a man who fears God and shuns evil." Well, Satan replied, "Well, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge of protection around him and around his house and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spared throughout the land. But now if you stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, well, surely he's going to curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, then everything he has is in your power. But on the man himself, you cannot lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now some have accused God here of callously making a bet with Satan and reducing Job down to nothing more than a pawn in a wager or in a bet that God had with Satan. But this wasn't a wager, this wasn't a bet, this wasn't some kind of game of chance between God and Satan. If you read it again carefully, this is simply Satan trying to usurp God's authority and power by attacking humanity, which Satan hates, because humanity is in the image and the likeness of God. And what Satan can't do to God, he tries to do to God's image and likeness all the time. And we have plenty of proof throughout Scripture that this is what Satan does to people. That Satan, from Adam and Eve to you and me, targets people through death, disease, and the dysfunction of humanity simply because we are created in the image and the likeness of God, and Satan hates us. You see, sometimes, church, I'm not trying to see Satan behind every sickness or a demon behind every disease, but sometimes physical things happen in our lives because of spiritual reasons. Because we are created in the image and the likeness of God and recreated in the image and likeness of Christ, which means Satan really hates us. Because we are created in the image and likeness of that which Satan cannot destroy. And so what he can't do to God, he tries to do to us. He hates you. And sometimes I think it would shock us if we really had an idea, a very clear understanding of how much Satan hates humanity. How much Satan hates you and me. He roams through the earth seeking whom he may devour. He lives to kill, steal, and destroy people. Because we're created in the image and the likeness of God. I think sometimes it would shock us if we really, really clearly understood how venomously and violently Satan hates us because we exist. But maybe it would then also motivate us if we really clearly understood how God talks about us and how much he trusts us. You know, somebody once said, and I would say they are true, that a parent's greatest fear would be to stand next to the graveside of one of their children. It's got to be the greatest fear. You don't even think about it. Of course it is. Well, come with me now as we continue in verse 13. As a parent's greatest fear becomes Job's worst day. It says, one day a messenger came to Job and said, Job, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing. And then the Sabians came by and attacked and stole all of them. They put all of the servants to the sword. I am the only one who has escaped to tell you this. And while he was still speaking, another one came by and said, fire from God fell from the heavens and burned up all of the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans have swept down on your camels and stolen all of them. They put your servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came by, and he said, while your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking at the oldest brother's house, suddenly a mighty wind swept in. I don't know if it was a tornado or if it was a straight line wind, but suddenly a mighty wind swept in and struck the four corners of the house. And it collapsed on them, Job. They're all dead. And I'm the only one who got out to tell you. Job did nothing wrong. Job was doing everything right. And yet his whole life in a day falls apart. He loses his wealth and his business, and all 10 of his children die in one horrific, horrible day. That wasn't fair. He had done nothing wrong. And ironically, absurdly, in his mourning and grieving, instead of shaking a fist in God's face and blaming God, he blesses God. In verse 21, he said, he tore his robe. Tears must have been streaming down his face. And he says, the Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. For all he knew that, he thought God was doing it to him. And yet he still says, blessed be the name of the Lord. Who talks that way? Who reacts that way? No one reacts that way. Many people, Christians and non-Christians, in that moment in time would shake a bony fist in God's face and say, how dare you? Where were you? Where were you when this happened to me? Weren't you watching? Weren't you paying attention? I thought you would always protect me. I thought you would always bless me. I thought you would always take care of me. I never thought you'd let bad things happen to me. Which is exactly as they blame God for the bad things that happened in their life, and they're real bad things. And it wasn't fair to them. They didn't deserve it. But you see, they're blaming God for it, which is exactly what Satan wanted Job to do. Even though it wasn't God's fault. I think to myself, what is it kept Job from turning his back on God? What is it that kept Job trusting God? What is it that kept Job from blaming God? And what kept Job blessing God? I mean, Job really does 180 degrees opposite things here that most people do. What is it that kept Job from not sinning by accusing God of wrongdoing? That's what verse 22 says. What kept Job from not doing exactly what Satan wanted Job to do? What Satan said Job would do, that Job didn't do. And it comes to what I think God was thinking about and what Satan targeted in chapter 1 that Job's wife will talk about in chapter 2. It's called integrity. It's called integrity. Integrity is that strength of character that ties you to God in a trust relationship. And it's at the end of that rope called integrity that you hang on to when your world unravels around you. When the worst case scenario happens and that day becomes your worst day. It's called integrity is what keeps you from turning your back on God and for blaming God for what God didn't do. It's integrity that keeps you trusting God and blessing God, even on the days when life is incredibly unfair. The question is, how are you going to react when life isn't fair? Are you going to shake a fist in God's face? Are you going to show God some trust and faith? Are you going to blame God and accuse God of being on vacation or not paying attention? Or are you going to bless God in spite of it all? I know I've told you this story before, and I apologize for going back to it. But on the backside of 1995 and 96, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this. You see, March 2nd of 1995 was Karen's and Mariah's and Joshua's and Vicky's and one of our worst days. It was a 40-hour day when Mariah's heart defect at 10 days old surfaced. And it was a 40-hour day that went from Winnipeg, two hospitals in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it ended 40 hours later at Toronto Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto, Ontario. And there was fear, and there was shock, and there was crying, a lot of crying, and a lot of confusion, and a lot of desperate dependency upon God for God to do that which only God could do. Because we kept having doctors and nurses tell us she was going to die any minute. For 40 hours, she teetered on the edge. And we did a lot of crying, and a lot of fear, a lot of frustration. But I, honest to God, never remember us blaming God for anything. We were too desperately dependent upon God to do that which only He could do. I'm not going to accuse Him at one moment and then ask Him to do something only He could do at the next moment. The flea cannot shake his fist in God's face. God is not cruel. He doesn't do bad things to good people. And so I remember in our desperate dependency and desperation, several times saying, you just need to fix her. She needs to live. I don't ever remember any ultimatums or accusations. I really don't. I'm not trying to sound hyper-spiritual here. I was mad at the situation. I was not mad at my God. I had too much faith in what His ability is, and I had no choice. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I had no choice, maybe Job said. Integrity is what keeps you tied to God in a trusting relationship when life isn't fair. Integrity is the first thing that Satan will target your life when life isn't fair. Integrity is the first thing that people will question, like Job's wife will in chapter 2, when life isn't fair. But integrity, holding on to your integrity, is the first step in surviving when life isn't fair. If you let go of the end of your rope, you'll be lost. But if you, like Job, will never let go of your integrity, even at the end of your rope, you will survive